All right, class, this is the Unit 6 Extended Response item Vodcast in which I'm going to go over the extended response that you're going to see on the Unit 6 test. First, let's start with the question. The question says the American patriots were at a disadvantage in many areas during the Revolutionary War. These disadvantages were overcome against long odds. The British also had disadvantages during the war, and they could not overcome theirs. The question is in two parts. You have part A here and part A and part B. Part A, let's start with part A. It says, name 3 patriotic disadvantages faced during the Revolutionary War and explain how these were disadvantages. Well, we could do this in bullet form if we wanted to. I would go ahead and restate the question. These are 3 disadvantages the Patriots had during the Revolutionary War. And 1. The fact that the Patriots did not have an army. And what army they did have was very poorly trained. Just a few people left over for the French and Indian War that had any military experience. So I would say the Patriots military was very poorly trained. And why is this at a disadvantage? That's the second part when it asks you to explain how these were disadvantages. The British Army, on the other hand, was extremely experienced and well trained. It was extremely well trained, actually. And experienced. And when these forces meet up in the beginning of the war, it bears out that the Patriots are at a big disadvantage. The British won quite handily. Number 2, the Patriots had no Navy. No Navy. The British had the strongest Navy in the world. That's why it was an extreme disadvantage. And lastly, the Patriots are at an extreme disadvantage because they had very little supplies. Let's see here. They had very, very little supplies for their army. And in contrast, the British were very well supplied. So there you have 3 Patriot disadvantages and their explanations. The Patriots military was very poorly trained. The British Army was extremely well trained and experienced. The Patriots had no Navy. The British had the world's strongest Navy. And third, Patriots had very little supplies for their army, and the British were very well supplied. So there's Patriot disadvantages and why they were disadvantages. Now we're going to go move on to part B, which asks us the question, What were the disadvantages of the British that they were not able to overcome? And you got to realize some of the British disadvantages were the Patriot advantages. So it kind of explains, kind of answers itself, actually. So if we look at Part B, let's look at Part B. Once again, we're going to start off by restating, guys. Part B. The British had 3 disadvantages during the Revolutionary War. And once again, we'll start by doing number 1. The fact that the colonists were fighting on their own land. They knew all the ambush spots. They knew the quickest ways to escape. And the British did not know the land, so it gave the colonists a distinct advantage and the British the disadvantage. So an advantage of the British army was the Patriots were fighting on their own land. Britain didn't know the land as well. Therefore, the Patriots had the advantage. 2. The motivation for fighting was also a disadvantage for the British soldiers. They were fighting basically for a paycheck, and the colonial soldiers were fighting for their freedom. So the motivation was on the Patriots' side. The British were fighting for money and not as motivated as the Patriots fighting for freedom. The Patriots knew that if they lost, they would be under British control. And the British, if they lost, they just returned to England. And number 3, one of the disadvantages that the British had was the distance to resupply their troops. The distance to resupply British troops was over 2,000 miles. Was over 2,500 miles. The colonists could get supplies in their own backyard. In their own backyard. If the colonists needed supplies, they can go to a local farm and say, we're fighting for the American patriot cause. Can you spare a cow? Can you spare some chickens? Can you spare some cloth for bandages? And they were more apt to get their supplies. The British, to get these items, had to either physically take them from the colonists or have them shipped over 2,500 miles away. So Part B, the 3 disadvantages that the British had was the fact that the Patriots were fighting on their own land. Britain didn't know the land as well, so that put them at a disadvantage. The British were fighting for money and not as motivated as the Patriots, who were fighting for their freedom. And the last one was the distance to resupply the British, their troops, was over 2,500 miles. The colonies could obtain supplies in their own backyard. Their resupply was as far away as the next farm. So, in conclusion, make sure you restate these questions. Remember these advantages and disadvantages that I've covered in here. And when you get to the extended response, you'll be thoroughly prepared to give me Very good answer.